Our next great topic that we want to deal with is random number generation. So one of the things that's super fun about random number generation is it's a way to be able to create random numbers. Say if we want to have an application or a game that involves random numbers, this might, for example, be something you will use on your next assignment. So probably good to pay attention, but it's good to know just anyway, because random numbers are kind of fun. And so what's the basic idea? The basic idea is it turns out, and now you're old enough to know, there is no true randomness in computers. You're like, well, my computer crashes all the time. That's pretty random, Aaron. I know. That's called a bug, right? Someone was writing some software for your operating system and they had a bug in it, and that's why your computer crashes, or in your word processor, or in your web browser, or I won't keep going. But those are caused by bugs. They're not caused by true randomness. There is no true randomness in computers. But there is a notion of what we refer to as pseudo-random numbers. And what a pseudo-random number is a number that's generated in some way that to a human being, when they look at it, hey, it looks pretty random to me, so it's good enough for me to think of that as a random number. Okay, and that's the idea. So the way we think about doing this is we want to have some kind of black box or some function that we can ask for random numbers. So wouldn't it be great if we had this black box over here that was this random number generator, and we could just go to it and say, hey, you know what? Give me the next random number. And it said, okay, here's a 5. And you're like, ooh, that's pretty neat. Can I do that again? Give me another random number. And it says, all right, here's a 3. And if you don't really know how these numbers are being generated, to you, they look random. They are pseudo-random numbers. And what's really going on is that inside this box, there's some complicated mathematical function. And so what happens is inside here, it keeps track of a little number that's known as the seed. And what it does, it takes that seed and it puts it through this complicated mathematical function. And then when you say, hey, I want a random number, it gives you back that random number. But it stores that random number internally that it generated as, or some variant of it, as its new seed. So that next time you ask for another random number, it takes that new seed, puts it through this complicated function, and generates for you a new random number that looks different as far as you know, because you don't know this function inside here, and it's so complicated you can't really figure it out. And then after it generates that new number, it updates its seed. And so the interesting thing about this is you're like, where does that seed come from? Well, it turns out if you don't give it a seed, it will actually generate sort of a seed that you can't figure out based on the number of seconds that have passed since January 1st of 1970, which most people don't know that number off the top of their head. But it turns out you can actually specify that seed. So you can say you should use this number as the seed for the random number generator. And if you tell it what its starting seed is, it will always generate the same sequence of random numbers. And you might say, but why would I ever want to do that? Like, I want random numbers. I don't want to know what the numbers are. I want them to be random. Why would I ever want to generate that seed myself? Think about it. And we'll come back to that question in just a moment. So what does the Python random library give you? It is a very random library, if you know what I mean. But in order to get the random number generator for Python, what you need to do is you need to import the random library. So up the top of your program, like you saw with math before, now we have the random library. It's actually just called random. You would say import random. And if you were importing multiple libraries, you just have multiple lines. Like you could say import random, then you could say import math on the next line and import multiple libraries. So that's fine. So what are the functions you get? There's a bunch you get. Let me give you sort of the big 4. The big 4 are, you can ask the random library for a random integer, and that's just rand int. And you give it 2 values, which is the minimal value and a maximal value. And what it gives you is back an integer that looks random to you, between min and max inclusive. So that means it can include min or max. So if I wanted to like generate a random die roll, I could say, 1, 6. So give me a number between 1 and 6. And I could potentially get back a 1 or a 6 or a 2, 3, 4, or 5. And it's equally likely across all those numbers. There's random.random. You're like, wow, that's a lot of random. It is a lot of random. If I say random.random, it just gives you back a random real value between 0 and 1. If you want to have a larger range, you can say random.uniform and give it a minimal value and a maximal value, and it will give you back a random real value or a float between min and max. So random int, remember, is giving you an int. Uniform, which is kind of a different name, is giving you back a float, but same kind of idea, uniformly random or kind of equally likely across all values. And you can specify the seed for the random number generator. Again, you're not required to. If you don't specify it, it'll kind of make its own. But if you want to specify the seed, you can say random.seed and give it a value. One value I like to use is just 1, right? That's a value I know. You know, it doesn't have to be anything fancy. I had a old office mate once at school who liked to use his phone number as the random seed. I don't know why. Kind of fun, just, fun thing to do. But then he realized, like, if he ever made his code public, everyone would have his phone number. So 1 is a good value to use too. Doesn't really matter, just as long as you specify something to give you the same sequence when you want it. So that's how we have the seed. So let's put this all together into a program called Roll Dice. And what is our Roll Dice program going to do? So here's my Roll Dice function. And so we'll go through this step by step so we can see everything that's going on and how we actually work with random numbers in a program. So just like you're used to at the top of the program, we're going to have a little comment that says this program simulates rolling 2 dice and prints the results of each roll as well as the total. We import the random library so we can make use of random numbers in our program. And then what we're going to have is a constant that's 6 that represents the number of sides on the die that we're going to roll. So basically, it's just like your traditional die that has 6 sides. And one thing you might notice here is that the word die is actually the singular form of the term dice. It turns out that dice is actually plural. So if you learn nothing else, just remember die is the singular form of thinking about dice. And so each one of the dice that we roll is going to have 6 sides according to the constant we have here. So what's our main program going to do? So let me scroll down a little bit so you can see all the main program. The program is going to start by generating a random value. So it's going to use the random number library to generate a random integer between 1 and the number of sides. In this case, the number of sides is 6, so it's going to generate a random number between 1 and 6, where 1 and 6 are also possibilities for what can be generated. We refer to that as inclusive. Okay, that value is going to get stored in die 1, which is going to represent our first roll. Then we're going to do the same thing for the second die. Die 2, we're going to generate another random number that's an integer between 1 and num sides. And then we're going to add die 1 and die 2 together and store that in a total. Then we're going to print all this stuff on the screen. We're going to print out the dice have num sides. Notice that we can use our constant in a print statement. So if we change the constants, it'll also change in terms of what we print out on the screen. So the dice have, it'll print out 6 sides each. Then it will print out the first die and the value that we generated for the first die, the second die and the value generated for the second die, and then it will print out the total. So let's try taking this out for a spin. Let's run it and see what happens. So if we run our program, what we see is it says the dice have 6 sides each. First die is 2, second die is 6. The total of the 2 dice is 8. So it's generated these random numbers and given their total. Let's run it again. So if I run it again, you can see I get slightly different values. The dice have 6 sides each. The first die now is a 1. The second die is a 6. The total is 7. Let me run it again. And if I run it again, it says the dice have 6 sides each. The first die is 5. The second die is 6. Seems to be getting a lot of 6s. That seems kind of weird. Total is 11. Let me run it again. Now we get something that doesn't have 6s in it. The dice do still have 6 sides each, but the first die is a 1. The second die is a 4. The total of the 2 dice is 5. So you can see how it's working to generate random numbers. Now, there are some things we can do to try out some different possibilities. One thing we can do is this random seed thing here that I have in a comment right now. I'm going to take it out of the comment. And what this does is it says seed the random number generator, that black box that's generating all of our random values, with the number 1 when you run your program. So what is that going to do? That means that every time we run our program, it will seed the random number generator with the value 1. And since that's the basis for all the random numbers that are generated in our program, every time we run the program, it's going to generate the same sequence of random numbers, which is pretty useful if we want to debug the program. So let's go ahead and run this version of the program now with the random seed set to 1. If we run this, it says the dice have 6 sides each. The first die is a 2, second die is a 5, The total of the 2 dice is 7. Let's run it again. Hey, we get the same thing. Just to be clear, I'm going to make the terminal a little bit bigger to show you, in fact, that we've run this the second time now. Here was the first run. Here was the second run, and we generated exactly the same sequence of random numbers. We generated a 2 and a 5 to give us a 7. Let's run it again so you can, in fact, see that wasn't coincidence. If we run it again, once again, we generate first die is a 2, second die is a 5, total 7. Run it again, run it again, run it again. Every time we're going to generate the same sequence of random numbers, because inside our main program over here, we set the random seed to say always generate the same sequence of numbers. Now, even though the random seed is a 1, that doesn't mean the first random number we get will be a 1. It just says use a 1 as the beginning of the process that generates random numbers. It still applies that process even to the first number that it wants to generate, which in this case happens to be a 2. Now, one of the other things we can do, let me make this small again so you can see more of the program. One of the other things we can do is say, hey, you know what? Instead of generating rolls for 6-sided dice, let me generate rolls, for 20-sided dice, maybe because I want to play some role-playing game that involves 20-sided dice. So I can just go in my program and change my constant num sides to 20. And if I do that now and run the program should still work, and everything should work as though I'm generating values for 20-sided dice. So let me run the program and show you. In fact, that's what happens. It now says the dice have 20 sides each. Why is it saying that? Because we used our constant here inside the print statement. So when we change our constant, it also prints out some updated value to the screen when we run our program. And then what are the values we generate? The first die is a 5, the second die is a 19, and the total is 24. Let me run that again just so you can see. And then I once again get a 5 and a 19 where the value is 24. You might say, but Maron, you're getting the same values. That's right. Why am I getting the same values? Because my seed every time is still being set to 1. So if I want to say, well, I'm done testing my program, I really just want to generate new random values every time, I can comment out setting the seed. And now if I run the program, I should get different values. And in fact, when I run it, I have 20-sided dice. First one happens to be a 3, second one's a 9. That's a value of 12. If I run it again, first die is a 4, second one is a 16, value is 20. So you can see now that I have not set the seed, I'm getting sort of different values every time I run the program. All righty, there we go.